Will the killing of George Floyd change race relations in the US? Protests against police brutality continue. President Donald Trump is accused of fanning the flames. Is there enough momentum to change laws and attitudes in what is already a polarized election year? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. The killing of George Floyd has reignited pent-up anger towards racism and police brutality in the United States. Since his death in Minneapolis more than a week ago, there have been nationwide, mainly peaceful, occasionally violent protests. And it's forcing America to look at its long-standing issue of race head-on.
Peaceful protest! Peaceful protest!
People defied curfews in more than 140 cities to demand justice for Floyd and other black Americans who've died at the hands of police. Demonstrators in Portland laid down on a bridge for 9 minutes. That's how long it took for the 46-year-old security guard to suffocate as 4 officers pinned him down. Aside from looting and violence in some cities, the protests have been largely peaceful, while the police response has been heavy-handed at times. And President Donald Trump has threatened to shoot looters and send in the army. And of course, this is all happening in an election year. In the midst of the unrest and the coronavirus outbreak, 7 states and the District of Columbia held presidential primaries for November's election. Presumptive Democratic nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden, says Donald Trump is making the country even more divided.
I look at the presidency as a very big job, and nobody will get it right every time. And I won't either. But I promise you this: I won't traffic in fear and division. I won't fan the flames of hate. I'll seek to heal the racial wounds that have long plagued our country, not use them for political gain. I'll do my job and I will take responsibility. I won't blame others.
Let's bring in our guests, all joining us from the United States. In Baltimore, Maryland, Jason Nichols, a progressive political and social analyst. In New York, Rosa Clemente, a community organizer. And in Washington, D.C., Richard Goodstein, a Democratic strategist. A warm welcome to you all. Jason, thankfully a quieter night on Tuesday, but the protests continue in large number. Will there be enough momentum, do you think, with them to really affect what happens in November, or if they peter out, will there be no impact?
Well, that's a difficult question. This is something that's been going on since, my parents' generation. There was Watts, there was Detroit. Of course, we all remember April 29th, 1992 in Los Angeles. And of course, in my own city in 2015 on April 25th. So, it's very difficult for me to say that this is going to be the watershed moment when we've seen these moments so often. What I can say is that if we don't have a serious reckoning in our society with these issues and with systemic oppression and white supremacy overall, we're going to have this happen more frequently, and it's going to get even more intense. But as far as saying that this is going to motivate people in Washington and people in power to make changes, I'm not so sure that I can say that based on the historical record.
Rosa, from a New York perspective, do you see momentum being maintained and it affecting what might happen in November?
Well, yeah, historically, like was just said, there's been a lot of uprisings and rebellions. The difference with this one is that even though the media is only covering a couple cities, there are over 150 cities in the whole country. There's been millions and are millions of people on the street. As it regards the election, look, Biden is probably the worst candidate that the Democrats could have at this moment, given his past racist remarks, how he treated Anita Hill, how he helped pass mass incarceration bills and all of that. And I think at this point, the American electoral political project is a failure. And I mean, we're used to what Republicans do, but a lot of people are asking, where are all the Democrats and not just Joe Biden? It's like maybe they're in a bunker because they've been completely silent for the last 2 weeks. And already young people were not enthused to have to go vote for a neoliberal like Joe Biden. And I'm not sure if what Trump has done is even enough to not stop his base from coming out. And lastly, given that the Republicans depend on voter suppression, those things are already happening in these primaries in early states. So I'm not sure, but I know that young people particularly are going to stay in these streets. In fact, last night while this was happening, police killed another unarmed black man in New York City last night.
All right. Richard, Rosa suggesting some young people won't be motivated enough still to put their votes to the Democratic cause. Do you think there'll be momentum for the Democrats out of what's been happening here in the last week or so?
I do, and let me explain why, Bernard. Remember, the day after Donald Trump was inaugurated, there was this enormous women's march in Washington, and the momentum has really carried Democrats in elections in 2017, 18, when they took back control of the House of Representatives, and even elections in 2019. And the turnout in the primaries this year for Democrats has also been way up before it got cut off thanks to coronavirus. And I would say that for Black Americans, for people of color generally, and for frankly anybody of any race, there can be no more stark contrast between Donald Trump's approach to tamping down protests and Joe Biden kind of basically telling people to glorify those protests. As to the notion of whether Donald Trump or whether Joe Biden will be a good candidate among Black Americans, that's how Black Americans voted. There were over 20 candidates running for president, and there was this rallying behind Joe Biden, even though some of the people he was running against were themselves African Americans. So notwithstanding what you just heard, there's a real confidence among people across the country in the African American community in Joe Biden's approach to governing.
Okay.
People's Democratic political strategists are always saying that, no disrespect, but look, who voted for Biden were older African American and Latino people. You're talking about a youth population that is half of the country, and in the best of times, only 38% to 40% of the electorate come out. So people have to stop saying that every Black American or Latino or Democratic person went for Joe Biden. That is not true. And the polls may reflect something, but what they're reflecting is an older demographic.
Okay. All right. Jason.
Well,
Jason, go ahead, Jason.
I just want to say that to Rosa's point, it's going to be new voters that are going to be the key to victory. You know, who can turn out voters, particularly in some of these key areas. You know, if you can turn out voters in Philadelphia and in Detroit, and they're new voters, and new voters are generally younger, that's going to be important. So I think that while Joe Biden may have the confidence of some people, and I'm not even sure that it's confidence so much as he's the name they know and the devil you know versus the one you don't, I think is part of this. But when you look at the younger demographics, Joe Biden is going to need them, and he's going to need them to turn out, and he's going to need large turnout from African Americans, not just the fact that the majority of them supported him in the primary, but he's going to need a large turnout. And I'm not so sure that he's going to get that.
Jason, well, let me just take that one stage further. I mean, what will win votes in November? Will it be that old, easy promise to toughen, to crack down on crime after the violence that's been seen attached to these protests, Trump calling himself your president of law and order? Or is it going to be a promise to tackle the causes of crime, education, housing, work opportunities? What's going to get the most of votes in November?
Well, I can tell you, you never stop a leak by putting a bucket down. That doesn't stop the leak. And so I think we need to go to the root causes, which were many of the things that you named. And even with policing, you know, there are lots of things that we need to change, but one of the things that I'll tell you is that you never police your way out of a social problem. So, you know, education, housing, the environment, access to food, all of these kinds of things are going to be things that we need to tackle, and healthcare, of course, coming off of a pandemic, or maybe even still in the throes of it, depending on how things turn out over the next couple of months. So if we don't actually address the root problems and the root issues, we're going to continue to be in these positions no matter who's the president.
Richard, go ahead.
Look, if you're a young voter, again, of any color, presumably you care about, say, climate change. And the contest could be no stark. Donald Trump thinks climate change is a hoax. Joe Biden has a very robust plan to address climate change. If you care about gun violence, Donald Trump's attitude is everybody should have a gun, and then it would be like the Wild West in the United States. And Joe Biden is respectful of the Second Amendment, but he says we need to do something. Over 90% of the people think we should have some controls. If you care about health care, Donald Trump's administration today is in court trying to invalidate the Affordable Care Act, which brought tens of millions of people health care who hadn't had it before, and Joe Biden is trying to build on healthcare. So let's put aside the fact that Donald Trump's saying he's going to run on law and order, and he has presided over disorder, over 100,000 coronavirus deaths, mayhem in the streets, and frankly, kind of no real strategy to deal with getting the pandemic under control, let alone dealing with race relations. So if you're a young voter, again, of any color, and you cannot see that contrast, then you know what? You probably shouldn't vote, and maybe you want to just kind of check out on the system altogether. I'd like to think that young voters are actually quite savvy, and they will actually see that the contrast could hardly be more stark.
Rosa, let me ask you this then. Is there a difference in the scale of the protest that we've been getting across the country, from your perspective in New York, is there a difference in who's taking part in those protests, the type of people taking part? If I think all the way back to Rodney King in 1991, it was black areas of Los Angeles that were rioting, that were protesting. But is there a difference now? Is there a wider resonance here?
Definitely. And I think one of those is that we're in the Black Lives Matter historical era post the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin. And what has happened is that particularly white young people, especially poor young people, I live in upstate New York, and we have a lot of opioid addiction and all the issues that particularly African-American, Latino, and Muslim young people have been facing. Particularly white young people are beginning or have begun to understand the privilege, and that they're sick and tired of this, because within all of this, we have the most inequity. We had a black president, and Black Lives Matter started under a black president. We have cities like Baltimore and a state like New York, where 80% of our elected officials who are Democrats are African American and Latino, and there has been no substantial change in the human condition for our people. Now, I will not be cavalier and say, you know, Trump is not worse than anybody else. Yeah, my daughter's just 14, she'd be a better president. We're dealing with a megalomaniac, a neo-fascist. But if young people are savvy, this is also a young generation that has been completely policed. Mass incarceration continues to grow. And look, I'll end on this point. We have Governor Cuomo and Bill de Blasio, both Democrats. Who has been the most violent police interactions in the last 3 days have been the NYPD. Bill de Blasio, a Democrat's own daughter, was arrested at the protest, and him and Cuomo still chose to send 4,000 extra police in there yesterday. Okay. Donald Trump didn't do that. The Republicans didn't do that, but a Democratic governor and mayor did that in our state, in our city.
All right. Well, we talk about the diverse people that are taking part in these protests. They're all demanding an end to discrimination and police brutality. And some of them say they'll keep pushing until change happens.
American people, not only just the black community, but Americans are tired of everything that's going on, the injustice that's going on in our country with police brutality and everything. So we need to make a change. We are here to tell President Trump that we want a change and we need to have reform.
The police have gotten away with a lot of action, and because there's never any justice served, there's never any punishment, they get given death duty maybe. That's what's causing this. That's what's happened for the last several decades, is that they don't see punishment, so there's no reason for them to stop. So, you know, it starts at the local level, right? I mean, we could complain to Trump all we want, but it starts with our local councilmen and local mayors, and they have the power to change some of this.
Personally, I think we should be out here every day until, you know, we see some type of change, right? Whether it's in any form, just something that'll give us hope to, you know, for the future, that things will get better. So I know people have been here like day in, day out, and I support it. I think we should be out here forever, you know, until things change.
Jason, are you seeing a difference in the makeup of people taking part in these protests in terms of the diversity of them compared to protests past?
Absolutely. So I was at a protest in Maryland, and I can tell you that it was one of the most diverse crowds. People, multiracial people, Sikh, Muslim, Indian, African American, white. There were many different kinds of people. I will say this, that I do think that there are people who are using this moment for their own purposes and not necessarily for some of the ideas that we're trying to get across, the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the many people that came before them. And I think that sometimes that diversity obscures what's going on and the people who are really engaged in the issue at hand. And so I think that while I respect what Rosa said and what she was saying about, you know, white youth having, you know, being more engaged, most statistics show, or most studies show, that today's white youth and millennials are just as racist as baby boomers. And as a matter of fact, many of the things that Rosa just said in terms of, you know, having confidence in a lot of the white youth, and I hate to sound like a pessimist, were the exact same things that Huey P. Newton said about young white youth, you know, many decades ago, that, you know, that they were somehow more, you know, engaged and understanding than generations before. So I get a little, you know, I think that a lot of this is actually black youth, you know, being fed up, brown youth being fed up and standing up. And then, you know, some white youth are getting involved sometimes for their own purposes that aren't necessarily devoted to ending systemic racism, white supremacy, and oppression.
All right. Richard, harnessing the passions from all of the protests across the country, what are the legislative responses the Democrats think they could push through to respond to the underlying causes behind Mr. Floyd's death?
Well, policies actually do make a difference, Bernard. In the 30 largest cities in the United States, where there have been policies instituted against chokeholds, against the use of lethal force to encourage de-escalation, the number of police shootings of innocent black people has actually dropped. It's in the rest of the country, in the suburbs and the rural areas, that it's gone up. So policies actually do make a difference. And I think Democrats, look, the contrast is stark. We saw what happened to George Floyd. There's no mistaking about it. And we saw what happened when the president wanted a photo op, and he basically got the troops to fire on innocent protesters. Again, everybody saw that with their own two eyes. So you can't spin your way out of this if you're the Republicans politically, many of whom are standing up for the president's kind of supposed right to trample over people's rights and almost trample over people physically so that he could hold a Bible in front of a church. So in a sense, the Democrats, while I think they do have to encourage policies that will address underlying problems of police brutality, as well as other dislocations that are historic and pervasive and need to be addressed, that will be addressed with the economy and education and job training and so forth. But we've seen the tape. And I think to a certain extent, Democrats don't have to say much. They just have to count on the common sense of the people who have seen this all.
And Rosa, quickly, is that the sort of thing you would? I promise I'll come to you in a second, Jason. Rosa, would you like to see those sort of legislative changes, responses, the banning of chokeholds, for example? Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, look, the LAPD and the NYPD have banned chokeholds for 20 years, and the LAPD has killed 614 people in the last 6 years, the most ever. NYPD has have gone under numerous reforms, and we still have the highest levels of police killing, right? So, you know, the thing is that at this point, there's no reforming the police. We're calling for abolishing and defunding the police. I've been in this movement for 25 years. I have helped create civilian complaint review boards and everything under the sun, and even body cameras. These police have body cameras and don't care. You know, so right now, this is where a lot of anger is coming from, that people have said, wait, reform, body cameras, give more money to the police. The LAPD, the budget in LA, 54% of the entire budget of the city of Los Angeles is for more policing. So that leaves 46% for everything else. Young people are that savvy. They are tired of people telling them, wait for a good policy, wait for a good Democrat. That's why they're in the streets right now.
Jason, there's been another idea on a commission on the social status of black men and boys. It only got one Republican co-sponsor last time round out of 93. Do you think that would have a chance? Would that be welcome or helpful?
Well, the first thing that I want to say is, you know, that all Black lives matter. So, you know, even though we are concerned with young Black boys and Black men, we can't forget all of the women who lost their lives to police violence. You know, people like Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, and you know, kind of getting to what Richard was saying, and Rosa, as far as, you know, electing a good Democrat. You know, Frey seems like he's a decent mayor. Walz had, you know, good things to say. Andy Beshear, they're all Democrats, and their areas are still going and having all these issues. So we actually need fundamental changes to the system and to, you know, policing in general. So I'm, you know, somewhere in between probably your two other guests, but we definitely need some sort of serious changes, not, okay, go out and vote, because who's the person we're supposed to vote for that would have kept George Floyd from dying? There definitely needs to be attention to Black boys, because they lead, you know, Black men lead in incarceration, in death. They have the lowest life expectancy. They die from preventable diseases. Like, there are many things that we need to pay attention to with Black men and boys, but I certainly don't want to minimize the lives of Black women, Black trans people, and others who sometimes are forgotten and left behind in society. Okay.
Richard, is there a risk that what's happened in this last week will be an issue to be treated like gun control has in the past? Immediate promises for action after mass killings, but then nothing happens, the outrage dies down, and everybody moves on.
So with gun control, as I mentioned earlier, about 90% of the American public, and including a hefty majority of Republicans, think that background checks, a pretty basic kind of check on guns getting into the wrong hands, should be legislated. And yet the National Rifle Association, for a variety of reasons that we could discuss, has basically put its foot on the neck of Republican office holders and have kept background checks from becoming
Could that happen
law.
to this?
So the question here is, who's the equivalent of the NRA that will stand in the way of reasonable action that would prevent police brutality and so forth? And I think the good news is there really isn't kind of an organized opposition to that. Donald Trump is trying to fan those flames, though. Let's have no doubt about it. He is basically poised with his finger with a lit match over kerosene, and he's waiting to drop it. That's what he's falling further and further behind in the polls as each week goes on. He's in a panic. and he's trying to think of anything he can do. I think the good news out of this is that people saw what happened to George Floyd from that sadistic policeman. And I think they think something needs to be done, and we can have all sorts of debates over time about what that is, but I think there's not much of an opposition to we need to do something to stop that in the future.
All right, folks, unfortunately, we're out of time. But thanks to all of you, to Jason Nichols, to Rosa Clemente, and to Richard Goodstein. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story, and I am at Jazeera Bernard. From me, Bernard Smith, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.